And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Employee Relations and Public Safety Committee, the ERPS Committee, joined by Commissioner Jeff Rader, and then Commissioner Bradshaw will be joining us just momentarily, but we have a quorum and we have our agenda before us, so we'll go ahead and kick things off here. And first is just the meeting minutes from the last committee meeting, April 19th. And if there are no edits or changes to those minutes, I'll entertain a motion for that minutes item.
Move approval of the April 19th minutes.
Second.
All right, motion in a second. Seeing no discussion, all in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right, chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right, so let's start out with item number 1299. This is a resolution requesting the governing authority of DeKalb County amend Chapter 15 of the Code of DeKalb County, Georgia, as revised 1988, to provide for the mandatory use of video surveillance systems at convenience stores and for other purposes. And this item was brought to us by Commissioner Cochran-Johnson. So appreciate her for bringing this, doing the work to get us to this point that we can review it and hopefully act on it. So I'll turn it over to Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Terry, and thanks for everyone that has come on board so that we can have this important discussion. Of course, you're a resident, an elected official, or just a member of the community. We have seen an uptick in crime and violence at several of our local convenience stores and gas stations. Of course, as a result of that, we've had a lot of news coverage, and we have had concern expressed by the community for ensuring safe environments to the extent possible. Of course, understanding we cannot legislate actions, morality, nor decency. However, I did believe that there are some things that we can do to help create safe spaces, particularly at what we know to be high-risk businesses. So what you have before you in this ordinance, it literally addresses gas as well as service stations, and we also create a definition for what we define as a high-risk business. And just to explain what a high-risk business means for the purpose of discussion, it is considered a retail establishment that is not a convenience store and has been designated as a high-risk business by the chief as a result of having more than 3 calls for police service within 30 days, or is a retail establishment where a serious crime such as murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, armed robbery, rape, child molestation, aggravated sodomy, aggravated sexual battery, or any felony possession or possession with intent to distribute controlled substances in violation of Georgia or federal law has occurred. So this piece of legislation will not only address what we define as convenience stores, which includes our gas stations, but also any business that we believe to be high risk as a result of any of the activity that we have described herein. Now, what it requires for those businesses is to have the following. It requires 24-hour a day, 7 days a week video surveillance. It requires that business owner to house the footage for a minimum of 30 days. It also requires, if there is an act of violence or activity in which we need access to footage, that the footage is made available to us within 72 hours of making the request. It also requires that there are proper and functioning cameras at all points of entry and exit. If it is a gas station, there must be video surveillance at each pump or the pump area. And it also requires proper lighting. And we are defining and requiring lighting to be, as well as camera coverage, 75 feet around the periphery of any building. Those are the major elements. Now, of course, one of the things that we found, because I personally, when there's incidents of crime, I've gone in and, business owners are happy to share footage and allow you to see what has happened. And in many instances, we already know there's an individual that's dead. There's, in one instance, a body in the parking lot. But when you look at the footage, because previously we have not regulated the DPIs, the dot per inches or megapixels of cameras. But with this legislation, it does require that any convenience store and or high-risk business have a video surveillance system that is a minimum of 4 megapixels so that it gives us clear footage. Many of you may have seen just last week, they were able to apprehend a young man within 24 hours in the city of Atlanta. And the footage was absolutely crystal clear. And that's the quality that you receive with a 4 megapixel camera. So what we're doing here is ensuring first that our high-risk businesses have adequate video surveillance to hopefully help deter crime, and or if a crime is committed, be a tool that is useful in identifying perpetrators and bringing them to justice quickly. What I've given you is pretty much the nuts and bolts of the piece of legislation itself. I can say that I have spoken with several local business owners, including gas as well as convenience store owners who are excited because they want to see a reduction of crime and they want to know that we have the ability to act quickly with what it is they have. So the conversation of what is adequate video surveillance in terms of megapixels had not been discussed. So I have not found businesses that are not willing to comply. And I feel that in the interest of public safety, the interest of public safety is far greater than the cost. These cameras are not expensive. You have a wide variety of options of 4 megapixels. Honestly, storage is more expensive than cameras. But again, I've not had any business that we've discussed this with express any cause for concern. But also, some of you may be familiar with the green light cameras that were recently implemented in the city of Detroit. And those cameras tap directly into our local police department. And I would like to, if Chief Mirtha Ramos is available, since the time this legislation was created, we have yet another exceptional opportunity here. I would like her to share the opportunity because we will, I'm not controlling the meeting, but I know we'll have the discussion, but I would even like to amend what has been presented here because now we have an opportunity to expand this technology. And through the chair, if I might, if Chief Mirtha Ramos can come on and explain this opportunity to expand and enhance this footage in a way that would honestly be groundbreaking for DeKalb County.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Commissioner. So the department is looking at a program called FUSUS. It's FUSSUS. And what it is it's a new version of what a real-time crime center should look like. It's a system that allows us to tap into absolutely any camera within the county as long as they give us permission. Previously, you would need to be on the same platform in order to be able to view remotely another surveillance video camera. In this case, they work with you, they work with the businesses to get permission to view all of the all of the video surveillance cameras. And you can view that from your car, from your phone, from your laptop. So the accessibility for the guys on the road would be great. Not only that, but investigative purposes. So we're looking into that. We had a meeting about 2 weeks ago. We're really looking to push that forward. We're trying to get some information from other agencies. Atlanta has it, Cobb County has it. MARTA is actually currently looking at it. Clayton County is currently looking at it. It's something that would really bring to the forefront security, availability. It would help us with investigations. But what I like about it is the fact that it's any video surveillance camera, even the Nest cameras, doorbell cameras. As long as we have permission, we can access it at a moment's notice from even our phone. I'm just trying to see, because I can't sell a lot of it right now. We're still doing our preliminaries, but it even allows us to access the GDOT cameras on the highways. It ties in the flock cameras into the same system. It allows people to text photos and videos where we could immediately access it through this app. It's very high tech. It's high tech. And I think it would be very beneficial to the department because it allows us to tap in and we could actually have live feeds as well. So depending on the access that we get, it could be live feed or pass feed. But we could really work with these companies. And if it ties in with the ordinance, I believe the gas stations won't have a choice but to grant us access. And I think it'll be very beneficial to the county as a whole if it ties into the ordinance and if we get this program called FUSIS. And when we push it forward, I'll have more details, have someone who knows a little bit more about technology who can really talk about all of the things that this program can do for us.
And thank you so much for sharing FUSIS with us for consideration. So what we're trying to do here is be forward thinking as we are presenting this piece of legislation, this ordinance as a body, because the moving trend is to move towards our local police officers having the ability to view in real time locations as needed. Since we are in the process of having this conversation, I think it only logical that we expand what we currently have to require any high-risk business or convenience store to be a part of any mandatory feed or active view. And I would actually lean upon our legal department in terms of the wording thereof. But that way we won't have to come back because this is the going trend now, so that local officials can tap into cameras at will and actively monitor any location and see what's happening. And it's not an invasion of privacy. I believe that we are in line with doing this because we've already established that these businesses are high risk. So I'm not sure if through the chair, perhaps, we can ask if she is on the call, our county attorney, Ms. Ernst, or I do see as well here, Mr. Terry Phillips, because I think it only logical, and I understand the amount of time that it takes to develop legislation, because this was about 9 to 11 months in the pipeline in order to make it here today. So I would welcome your comments there in terms of this ability to do mandatory requirements that the DeKalb County Police Department have the ability to actively monitor these locations at any time through live feed into their systems.
May I, Commissioner?
Yes, go right ahead, Terry.
Two things. Obviously, Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, we will gladly look at that. I would like an opportunity to work with Chief Ramos to understand the FUSIS system, the requirements of it, so that we can properly craft legislation and give you recommendations on how to incorporate that in what you presented already. And I believe that's what you were asking of us. But until I take a close look at exactly how FUSIS works and the best way to incorporate it, I couldn't tell you that right now. But we'll gladly look at it and make the appropriate adjustments and recommendations to you. The one other piece I would add, having heard your description of what's currently presented, please recognize that Director Lumpkin suggested we make one addition to the definition that you gave for the high-risk business, and you read it very carefully, which is why I'm adding that. That would include also any crime involving a firearm. So that would be a slight expansion to what you've heard in the definition that you read. And I don't think that changes the review of FUSIS at all. It just expands the businesses that may be included here.
And thank you for pointing that out so that we have a point of clarity and order there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. And Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, I wanted to ask a question just in that same regard, because I know we were talking about this in regards to the small box discount retailers. And I think kind of the concern that we had heard with some of those locations was video surveillance of like, people dumping, just trash at some of these locations. So I know that's not a violent crime that wouldn't fit under high risk business. But I couldn't remember, did we get to a place in the small box discount legislation that would require video surveillance as well at those locations?
Well, interestingly, to the chair, because in DeKalb County, we have had acts of murder at 2 different box stores, and there are known incidents of violence at several others. I'm sure that working with our local police department, they could provide a more detailed record. But where this is going is under the definition that we currently have for a high-risk business. Several of those locations automatically fall under high-risk business. With research that I'd previously done, because of the size of box stores, they sort of fly under the radar because they generally don't build over 10,000 square feet. And as a result of it, it is not required that they have certain lighting or camera packages that would be required of other retailers. So this would allow us to have mandatory surveillance and video footage at those locations because of those acts of violence. They're automatically now a high-risk business.
Absolutely. And I want to open up for questions to the commissioners here. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I think you had mentioned that in speaking with some, convenience store owners, that I believe at least one you pointed out had already sort of, I guess at your encouragement, upgraded all of their cameras to high def and really took it to heart. And so could you share that story with us?
Absolutely. This past weekend, myself, along with the Rockbridge Coalition, Kappa Alpha chapter of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and several other organizations and concerned citizens, we held a Stop the Violence rally at that particular corner of Green Ann and Harrison because of the amount of violence that has taken place at the Chevron station on the corner. And he and I had a conversation earlier, and I told him about this legislation that I was proposing. And he immediately went out, independent of being required to comply, and upgraded his camera system because no one had ever had a conversation with him about megapixels and or the quality of footage. So in this particular instance, as you're sharing, because he wants to be a part of solving the problem. And, by and large, businesses want to do good business. And he's very concerned about perception in the community. So he has already voluntarily complied. He went out and he purchased 4 megapixel cameras so that by the time, this, with the anticipation that this would become a requirement, regardless, he wanted to provide the best environment possible so that when there are perpetrators or acts of violence, he's able to be a partner with DeKalb County rather than having subpar equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think this probably goes without saying, but I want to ask Chief Ramos if she could just speak specifically about, how valuable is it to have video evidence, high definition video evidence for investigators?
I think it's highly important, but not only just for the investigators. Nowadays, it's important to know what you're getting into. So the uniformed officers themselves being able to access this video and knowing what they're dealing with real time would be very valuable. It'd be able to keep them safe. If they need more officers, they're able to request more officers before they get there. So I think you just can't go wrong with video surveillance, and live feed is very important.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Bradshaw.
All right, thanks, Commissioner Terry. Thank you, Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, for bringing this forward. Very well done. We've got a couple questions for Chief Ramos, if that's all right.
Yes.
For my edification, this FUSIS system, how is it similar and how is it different from Flock?
Well, and I forgive me because I'm not too much in technology, but the way that it is different is that Flock, you have to get alerts on your laptop. You have to access the system to get information. In this sense, and we don't actually get any live feed either. In this sense, we'd be able to not only access all of the Flock information through this same system, but we're able to access any surveillance camera that has given us the authority to access it, whether it's live feed or recorded feed. So that's a lot of savings of time. It's one app where you can do both things. So I think that will save us some time and everything will be in one central location. And the Flock, even though they utilize it on the road, as they usually use it as an investigative tool, where in this case, I think uniformed officers would be able to use this system a lot more than they would be Flock, and including Flock with the same app.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. And with regard to the live feed, will you have adequate manpower for monitoring and then taking action upon, the information that you're getting?
Well, the advantage to this is the live feed is not where we would have like a real-time crime center, because there'd be no need, because literally anybody could pull this information up on the computer or the phone. The live feed would be more as, let's say a narcotics investigation is going on. Rather than having units actually doing surveillance, they could be sitting down the street in their office on the phone and actually doing our surveillance on the phone through these live feeds. There's so many things that can be done with this FUSIS that will allow us to do more with limited manpower and also keep our officers safer, because they won't actually have to have the boots on the ground, but they'll have the eyes on what's going on. So the live feed would not be so much for day-to-day monitoring, even though we could do that, but more from monitoring scenarios, incidences, locations that we normally would keep an eye on, but we would do it while we're actually there in person rather than from our office or in our car.
Okay, very good. And then one more curiosity question, just for my edification with regard to the cost of the 4 megapixel cameras, about how much do they run? I assume these costs are borne by the shop owner, but if anybody has the answer to that, I'm just more curious. I'm just curious as to how much they cost.
Well, I don't have that information. I'm not sure if the commissioner does.
Okay, it's just a curiosity question, so it's not super urgent. So if anybody's got that, then you can shoot me an email with what the cost is.
And I'm very comfortable in saying, of course, it will depend on the amount of gas pumps, because again, these cameras are required at each point of sale, each point of entry and exit, as well at each gas pump. So
Okay.
You're looking at anywhere from a couple $100 to several, maybe a couple $1,000. If you were to buy a 4 megapixel camera system for your home, they generally come with about 4 cameras,
Okay.
and you may spend about $200, $249. And then thereafter, as a general rule, per camera, you're going to be looking at, $50 to $75, but you can get as fancy as you like. So I'm expecting the average business to have to invest probably about $2,000 to $3,000 into these cameras. As a general rule too, any business that has video surveillance already, they should already have a server or a method of storage of footage. And that's where the bigger cost comes, if, you know, in terms of storage of footage and cameras. Even high def cameras now are not very not expensive.
All right, thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. And I yield back.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Bradshaw. Commissioner Patrick, then Commissioner Rader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, I just want to say I think this is a pretty solid idea. I do have a couple of questions with the intent of hopefully having staff think a little more in depth on this. For the high-risk businesses, I know they were primarily focused on violence. I was wondering if you might possibly consider human trafficking as yet another item to add to that list, just as another way to keep our residents safe. The second question I had was timeframe for compliance. So the BOC adopts this as an ordinance. Is this something that you would see being applied or implemented, you know, next time business licenses have to be renewed, or is there a time frame with which businesses have to come into compliance? That would be the second question. And then I know staff has come to us and talked about you know, the lengthy list of items they have to check when it comes to approving an existing business license or renewing an existing business license. Has staff looked into any additional resources from staff time or personnel in order to help process business licenses on a more expeditious level? And those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm happy to say I believe I can adequately answer each question. In terms of human trafficking, thank you. I think that would be a wonderful friendly amendment. And I believe that it is absolutely in order, because when we know of incidents of human trafficking, particularly at our local hotels and motels, absolutely. I personally would support the friendly amendment to include any location where there has been human trafficking. The second question that you asked related to timeframe for compliance. Once this is accepted as an ordinance, businesses must be in compliance by the time of the renewal of the business license. So I think it will be incumbent upon us to reach out to local businesses, make them aware of the ordinance change. And of course, gives them some window of opportunity in terms of getting themselves and their house in order. Now, once a business applies for the business license through the Planning and Sustainability Department, very much as we do with an inspection, the very first time the business would require an inspection to verbally see that all points of entry and exit are actively monitored, as well as the point of sale and the gas stations, as well as the 75-foot periphery of the building. Once it is verified, we move forward with the issuance of the business license. And of course, thereafter, each and every year, the business is required to sign an affidavit at the time of seeking a business license renewal, indicating that their camera system remains in good repair and operative. One of the things that I didn't say that this legislation also does, it does enforce mandatory fines if we should reach out and we are in need of footage as a result of criminal activity, and you do not have operative cameras at your place of business. Lastly, if you are not in compliance, it is tied directly to your business license. You will not have the ability to renew your business license. And I hope that answers everything for you.
Just a quick follow-up, and this is from some experience with business licenses being issued. If something happens and they're not able to come into compliance and their business license gets held up, a lot of these smaller, say mom and pop operations, I think the liquor license or alcohol license is tied to the renewal of the business license. And so I would just want us to be cognitive of not necessarily setting off a chain reaction of other problems for the business, which then puts them into hot water with the state and other regulatory compliance or fees that have to be paid. So that would just be just a cautionary discussion point there. And then the final question was again, have you had a chance to speak with staff about perhaps providing additional resources, hiring additional people so that we can make sure we can implement these requirements, but it's done within a timely manner, as in business licenses can be turned around relatively quickly for something like this?
Absolutely. This has been an ongoing discussion now for almost a year with all parties. Mr. Andrew Baker, we've had discussions at length, and he does feel at this point that he has adequate staff to include the initial visits to verify compliance with his current staff. So at this point, he has not expressed a need to expand staff as a result of moving forward with the legislation.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it.
Right, thank you, Commissioner Patrick. And just to follow up on that point, I think Commissioner Patrick brings up some good points and things to consider. And it seems like, the definition of convenience store and how those are processed through the business licensing is probably already sort of baked in, and there's a way to maybe add that into the process there. Maybe the only other thing to note is how we go about categorizing a location as a high-risk business so that it sort of triggers for the planning department that, oh yeah, they're not a convenience store, but they're a high-risk business. And so we need to go through this review process. And I imagine that between the public safety and police department, they would already maybe have that information of what is the high-risk business or maybe a location, and maybe there's some sort of cross-matching. But I think that's all kind of in sort of leading up to, like you were saying, Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, that this would go into effect, I guess, by the next time licenses were renewed. So in that case, it would be, in essence, are they always renewed at the same time, or are they always renewed like on a running basis? So some businesses might have to comply sooner as opposed to later, depending on like what time of the year they got their license.
And I will, Commissioner Terry, allow the administration to respond, because I have never operated a business in DeKalb County. Of course, I've lived in Lithonia and Stonecrest. And with both of those, with their policies, business licenses are renewed the top of the year, literally. And during that time, you have about, I believe, until March to complete your renewal and be in compliance. Thereafter, you are assessed a fee. But I'm not sure if in DeKalb it's more of a concurrent thing where if you apply and receive your license in April, then it would be renewable in April. I'm honestly not sure. But even with the Golden Glide skating rink, where recently the 11-year-old was shot and remains in a coma, technically, as of that incident, they are now considered a high-risk business in DeKalb County. So they would be required now to meet these guidelines. Very sensitive to, and I would hope that businesses are as well, to the points that Commissioner Patrick raised as it relates to liquor licenses and a spiraling. So that being said, I would hope they're cognizant that they are prepared to act, because to me, the risk of public safety and the preservation thereof is so important that there's no pass with this. You need to be in compliance. And currently, with just the cameras, I know personally from, operating businesses, it's what I call the CODB. It's the cost of doing business. And it is in your best interest, I believe, to ensure the most safe environment possible, because all actions have consequences. Many instances, you have local businesses that are sued as a result of an injury taking place. We can't legislate morality and decency or the actions of individuals, but doing everything you can on the front end to be a deterrent is very important. You will also notice in the legislation, we're developing a little seal that clearly indicates that this business is under 24-hour surveillance. So it will also give individuals a sense of safety in DeKalb as they're using gas pumps and visiting certain businesses to know that there is active monitoring going on. And I'm very excited about uses because technology is increasingly playing a larger role in the prevention of crime. If you do research on the green lights that are being used in Detroit, my problem with Detroit's system that's similar to what we have here that we're presenting, it has the 4 megapixels. And in order to tap in, they are charging businesses between $4,000 and $6,000. Once you have paid your fees, of course, they are handling the installation of cameras. And with the installation, you receive a daily check, meaning a local officer will come on site. Also, you receive priority response to calls. This is highly debatable. It's being debated a great deal, their system, because they're creating what I call a have and have not. Not all businesses may be able to afford $4,000 to $6,000, but just because you do not tap into the green light system, and this also, their system utilizes fuses, so it gives the ability. They actually now in Detroit have a monitoring center. So people literally sit there and look at the service station and what's going on in the parking lot. And this takes place, throughout the day and night where there's active monitoring. But I think all businesses should be entitled to active community policing, and it shouldn't be based upon your ability to pay a fee. So I commend us for doing it a different way, but we should be achieving the same outcome as them. But again, this cost of upgrading cameras would fall upon the business owner.
Thank you. Commissioner Rader.
Thank you. So we've spent about 2 years trying to research and evaluate the characteristics of small box retail as it relates to some correlation with crime. Is there similar work that has been done with convenience stores that documents a elevated risk associated with those types of businesses? And that goes to the law department or somebody that we just have one finding in the ordinance that declares and fines a significant number of violent crimes occur at convenience stores. Is there supporting documentation for that?
Commissioner, I think Dr. Dabney did that research when we enacted the SLUP 6 ordinance that dealt with that research at one time. And there is, I think, empirical evidence within DeKalb of a number of crimes, just looking at the front page of the newspaper, of a number of homicides occurring at convenience stores. But I believe that research was done by Dr. Dabney previously in connection with the zoning ordinance. Okay,
so there is sufficient documentation to support that finding. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, there is. And I don't know that we need a study in order to have requirements with respect to business licenses. It is a little bit different than when we are dealing with zoning requirements and we are regulating one business a bit differently than we are regulating other businesses in terms of zoning. And so I believe there is sufficient factual predicate for this ordinance. Yes, sir.
And then on nuisance businesses. We also, don't we have some video surveillance requirement for hotels? Or do we? Anybody?
I don't know, Mr. Williams, do you know?
Commissioner, I will look back at that. I am not aware of that requirement within our code, but I will take a look and respond offline in an email to everyone.
All right.
Commissioner, are you thinking when we did the extended stay?
Well, that's what I'm trying to get to, because obviously extended stays or hotels of any sort are an area where people tend to, at the same time, they're transient and they're also sort of congregating or, hanging out in a place like that. So I'm just wondering if it is otherwise covered, or if retail establishment would potentially cover a hotel, or if hotels may have similar characteristics that would.
Commissioner, I have an answer to that question. I believe that it is actually covered in the hotel regulations we put into effect in what year?
Looks like they went into effect in March of 2018.
In March of 2018, but I will forward those provisions to you all.
Okay, so I guess what I'm wondering is, are our hotel regulations consistent with then some of the specifications of this new regulation, such that we would have a standard, level of
I would suspect they are not consistent with these, but we'll take a look at them and let you know.
well, and I would suggest that they ought to be, if we're going to establish a technological standard by virtue of the fact that it's effective in supporting enforcement. We wouldn't want to have hotels not meeting that standard. The third question that I have is there any way to get off of the high-risk business list?
Say that again, Commissioner.
Is there any way to get off of this high-risk business list? Or if you have a single incident, the requirement is in perpetuity? Or does that requirement ever burn off?
It's a great question. Commissioner Cochran-Johnson.
I can say, Commissioner Rader, that once you are identified as a high-risk business, this legislation that I've drafted makes no provision for you to come off of a list for a period of time due to good compliance. In all honesty, I just think it is good practice. And once you have your cameras in place, I don't see why a business would want to be removed, because I don't think that it's a scarlet letter of sorts. To be identified.
More in terms of the relocation of a business, or the remaking of a business, or something along those lines, where they may have the same licensee or work under the same business license, but have had some substantial change to their operation. I don't know that there is a necessity to pull them off. It just seems as though maybe there ought to be some means to be able to petition to be relieved or something like that. So just for consideration on that particular issue. And then I guess the third question that I have is there any provision with your lighting requirement to in any way regulate spillover lighting? It seems as though, the goal is to have areas very heavily lighted, but it may be an unintended consequence that there is spillover lighting. I know that when we do zoning, there is often a strong community interest in spillover lighting, and to avoid adjacent residential or other businesses that would not want that harsh lighting, such as a restaurant or something like that, to prevent their being impacted.
Go ahead, Commissioner Cochran-Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of spillover lighting, and I welcome zoning to sort of chime in here. But as a general rule, when it comes to your convenience stores and retail businesses, they're going to be within a retail district. I personally, I can understand where you're going with the previous question. If a business should move or relocate, and there has been an incident of crime or violence at one location, then once they leave that location, I could understand us not enforcing the mandatory high-risk business standard if they leave. So from that standpoint, that's a good one. I don't believe that will materially alter what we have here. But in terms of spillover lighting, I don't believe, I've never seen a convenience store located next to a residential home, or even for that matter, for the most part, multifamily units. I don't foresee that being an issue, but I would defer.
I see Director Baker's got his hand up here. Yes, Director Baker, then Mr. Phillips.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that the zoning code does have standards for lighting of commercial. So we do have some regulations in terms of that lighting. We also have something that we call the shields to put on either sides of the lighting to actually minimize the impact if there is residential next adjacent to it. But we definitely can take a look at that and make sure that it's all compatible and there's no unintended consequences.
I think that would be helpful. I just do know that even, I mean, certainly with a convenience store, I think we're thinking about a particular configuration. I have seen convenience stores in the vicinity of multifamily residential, certainly. But when we go beyond convenience stores to some of these high-risk businesses, you're going to find a business that is in a shopping center, and it may be in the vicinity of another business that is either perhaps an office or professional office, or maybe a restaurant with a, some other types of seating or something like that, where it may, negatively impact their business if, that type of, high intensity lighting affects them. I think that, certainly some language as it relates to spillover or shielding would perhaps be useful in order to ensure that there weren't that type of conflict. And then a final question. We are talking about the maintenance of surveillance of areas that are ultimately private property and making that surveillance available to police without recourse to a subpoena or any other, sort of documentation of necessity for that. Is there any issue with that in terms of privacy, or are these areas considered sufficiently of a public place that there is no expectation of any sort of privacy in those locations?
May I, Commissioner?
Yes.
2 points. With respect to the lighting concern, I'd just like to point out that one of the requirements for the technical ability of the camera is that it can record with night vision and infrared, so that the 24-hour, 7 days a week that's required would include recording when the store is closed, when the lights are at their lowest point, etc. And that may help manage the lighting issue. With respect to your next question, there is a notice requirement where each of the businesses have to place a sign stating that these video cameras are being used, and that would address the privacy concern.
Okay, and therefore the business does not have any right to condition access to that recording on a subpoena or any other threshold of public review?
Well, what I can tell you is the way this legislation is drafted is the county and law enforcement would have an opportunity to obtain a copy within 72 hours. With respect to a private party issuing a subpoena or seeking a court's permission to obtain a copy, I wouldn't comment on that. That would be analyzed on a case-by-case basis, sir.
Okay, but I mean, the county would be able to obtain that, that recording without any further action other than just a request. There would be no review of that request.
That is correct. And with all due respect, Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, your request was that it be within 72 hours.
That's correct.
Okay.
And in all honesty, I think it should be even less, within 48. When there is a crime, it's a serious matter and we need to be able to act expeditiously. I think what we find, and I'm sure Chief Ramos can respond, is as a general rule, when video surveillance is active and in place, they will immediately turn over footage. It's rare that there would be an issue with supplying it unless there is an individual that may not be adept in how to utilize the equipment that is on site to pull footage. So that's why we did allow 72 hours upon request of footage at any given time.
Okay, and what I'd like to know is that a new power of the police to be able to acquire that, or is that already used elsewhere in code, such as with hotels or other areas of the code where we may have some surveillance review capacity?
Well, Commissioner, one thing I need to point out is with respect to the privacy concern you're addressing, in this legislation as proposed currently, the cameras are placed in a fashion that capture public spaces, the entrance to the store, the cash register, the place where patrons would go and those things. And that's a significant part of this. I hope that's helpful to you.
Well, it is.
With respect to the-
find out if this is a new authority that we are conferring or if we have already assigned this authority in other situations to have surveillance footage on demand by the police department.
Well, these issues are addressed on a case-by-case basis. So there are areas where we're looking at this and each one is analyzed separately and we go through them case by case as the legislation is proposed, sir.
Right, but is there another circumstance under our code where there is access to surveillance, within a set period of time by, without any further condition? In other words, in the hotel surveillance that we have, is there any process beyond a request that is necessary in order to mandate its surrender?
I couldn't answer that for you in a vacuum, Commissioner.
I understand. I'm just trying to find out. I'm trying to figure out where we are going beyond current practice in certain areas. I mean, like I said, the spillover lighting, we do a lot to regulate that. So I'm trying to see whether or not this supersedes our current approach to spillover lighting. And I'd also like to see if this supersedes a current approach to being able to ask for the surveillance. I'm not saying that it should or shouldn't. I'm just trying to find out the answer to the question. And then, obviously, hopefully we can figure out something to where if a business changes location or something, perhaps they don't have to reinvest if their business changes or something along those lines.
So, Commissioner, I'll note all three.
Yeah, thank you. I'm
as this
not
legislation-
asking for a response on the floor here. I just would like to understand how far this goes beyond what we're currently doing. All right,
Well,
thanks.
I was just going to add, if I may, the final draft of the legislation, when you're through making the tweaks, will allow us to answer those questions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, great line of questioning. And I think kind of and I was sort of thinking the same thing, Commissioner Rader, because, over the last 10 years, we have seen an increase in what, some would refer to as the surveillance state. There's a camera on every corner. There's a camera in every, doorbell. So there's the balancing of public safety versus right to privacy. And I think, as we move forward with this discussion and, certainly additional, I think, other police or public safety measures that, in a perfect world, everything would be on the up and up and everything would be, done great. Understanding that, systems can have blind spots, human beings can, make mistakes or have other intentions in mind. And I think that one of the things that we'll have to tackle maybe at the ERPS committee in the future is sort of that oversight or ombudsman or some sort of ability to just ensure that whether it's the hundreds and hundreds or thousands of hours of video surveillance that's out there, is being used for the intended purpose, as opposed to what I think, rightly some privacy advocates are concerned could be used for other purposes. But that being said, this is why we, exist here in government, is to find ways to address all of the issues. And these are complicated ones for sure. I think the immediate concern is that, we know that we've got high risk businesses. We know that we've got a number of incidences happening at convenience stores and other locations. And as Chief Ramos mentioned, the surveillance for the investigators and or the live real-time possibility for some of those potential response calls could really be important in protecting lives, saving lives, and certainly investigating crimes. Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, did you want to respond to anything else on that front?
No, I trust the legal department. I can say, Commissioner Rader, because I did do a great deal of reading. What we're doing, this is the first time we would have or make mandatory response with the 72 hours. Previously, there has been no mention in any of the ordinances that I've seen that holds a business accountable in any way to either have footage or produce it. So that's why I felt there was the necessity for the legislation. In the interest of public safety, I know personally that our son was robbed at gunpoint at a gas station on Browns Mill Road, just not even a quarter of a mile from our home. And they indicated when I went that, to see, after being made aware of what happened, that they had video cameras, but they weren't active at the time. There was no active monitoring. And I do want to point out to anyone else that may be on this call, including code compliance. And when I stood there in the store and I looked around me, they couldn't see the gas pumps because they had so many posters in the window that the view was completely blocked. This is only one element of what needs to be a conglomerate approach. So I said to him, you shouldn't have more than a third of your window blocked.
Yep.
He immediately said, no one has said that. No one has said that I'm out of compliance. I said, well, that is a violation of code. And I said, you should be more concerned with public safety than advertising products that we know you have in this store. And the very next day, he had removed all of the posters from the window. Mm-hmm. So a lot of this is a conversation, and we have to determine for ourselves how far we're willing to go what we're comfortable doing, yet balancing it with the rights of business owners to ensure safe environments. And the truth is, when it comes to our gas and convenience stores, we see them repeatedly, unfortunately, and at no fault to the business owner in the news, but they do tend to be businesses that are high risk. So for us, this is taking every, I believe, reasonable measure to help them protect those that frequent their facilities and ensure that if there is an incident of crime or violence, that we are able to act swiftly and that our local police officers and authorities have clear footage that will very easily or more easily lean towards identifying perpetrators. As I said, and even some of the local news stations pointed to the clarity of the video footage from the Cleveland Avenue murder. And they were able to catch the perpetrator within 24 hours because the clarity was just as clear as us sitting here now. And I do want to also thank Attorney Terry for pointing out, Terry Phillips, that it does include with the 4 megapixels, you are getting infrared so that even at night, clarity is there. So I'm grateful for the discussion. Very grateful for Mr. Baker coming on, indicating that shields can be utilized. And since this is going through planning and sustainability, I would ask that they are reasonable when they go out to make the initial inspection to ensure that there is no spillover. And if there is, then require the shields be utilized.
Absolutely. And we're kind of running up the end of time here, Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, but this has been a really important agenda item, and I'm glad we've spent a lot of time diving into the details of it. It sounds like there's probably a few tweaks coming for a substitute for this, just based on some of the information that we've been discussing and a few of the questions. Would you like to defer this for a little bit? What's your preference so we can have the changes worked on that we've discussed here today?
I would honestly defer first to Attorney Phillips and the legal team to ensure that they have the time adequate, whether that be a 30-day deferral or longer, because I do understand that, you know, it may take a while and I'm not sure what their caseload will be. So I think it's a valuable conversation, and I know that we can come back, but I would ask him to let us know what he believes is reasonable for the research of the items that's been presented.
May I, Commissioner?
Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, thank you, Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, for giving me an opportunity to give you some input on the time I think it will take. I think a 30-day deferral is reasonable, but I say that in the hopes that I can speak with Chief Ramos as early as this week to start our research to make the changes you're seeking.
Great. Chief Ramos, would that work for you?
Yes, I will make myself available.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much for working on this. This is, you know, we're in a public safety crisis in a lot of our communities, so this is very important, and appreciate y'all working on this post haste. Commissioners, committee members, if a motion for 30-day deferral is appropriate, we'll open the floor now.
So
Yeah,
moved.
I'll support. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay. All right. Motion is second. Seeing no further discussion for the 30-day deferral. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Okay. I know we have the community safety item as well, but let's tackle these two other ones, Zach, if that's all right, and we'll come back.
Absolutely.
It's added. So we have this 1377, the speed zone order and radar permit application. As we discussed at the last meeting, this application does have a time sensitive deadline, and we don't want to miss out on that. We also acknowledged that additions to this radar permit application in terms of the potential other streets or other areas that would be added to it could be worked on, particularly for the school zone ones, could be worked on in the fall of this year's school year and could be considered for next year's application. But the item before us today is the list that has already been vetted and has had all the required GDOT studies done for them. And so if commissioners are good with moving this forward, I'll open the floor for a motion unless there's any other questions or comments on the item.
I'll move that we recommend approval, but I have a comment.
Okay.
All right, I'll second.
Okay, good. Sure.
I don't know whether it is by action of this committee to recommend a regulation or whether the administration can develop a procedure or a standard operating procedure, but I do think that as we repeat this process, which is a periodic one, that there needs to be a solicitation of the Board of Commissioners prior to the commencement of the process for recommendations for changes in the speed limits.
Absolutely.
I had an extensive consultation with the Transportation Division on an area. One of the reasons that this is particularly important is that our traffic calming program is only available to streets that have a speed limit of 30 miles an hour or below. And so a higher speed limit can exclude areas from this option for public safety. It's ironic because then if we take this action without this rather cumbersome process, then we lose our ability to enforce on that street. So those communities are really kind of in a catch-22 insofar as they can't reasonably expect a great deal of enforcement, but they also can't undertake a traffic calming process. So, Mr. Williams, if you'd like to formalize that process, that would be great. But in this case, it didn't work. And y'all now say that there's not time to do it. So the other option is for the commission to adopt a more formal regulation on a process such as this. And I think that probably it would be easier if you'd come back with something that would give us a standard operating procedure.
Absolutely, Commissioner Rader. Director Lemke and Director Allen and I will circle up after this discussion and see if we can find a way to solicit the input that you're seeking.
All right.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think we've already kind of maybe put that in motion because it sounded like there was opportunity to do some speed studies this fall during the school year or in other locations, which would precipitate adding it to the list in next year. So it seems like we have to kind of have a 6 month to a year head start is kind of my understanding, or maybe the preference. So there's time to do that traffic study or speed study. So I guess now would be the time to start kind of getting solicitations from commissioners or, maybe through, I don't know if our unified planners have been picking up any, on the survey of this road speed or, something. I don't know if there's other data out there that the planning department might have, but Commissioner Patrick, any comments, questions on that?
I just wanted to add a reminder that I did have a ordinance or I should say a request for a countywide traffic counts. And when the equipment is deployed for traffic counts, it also can get traffic speeds. So
Great.
It would be a great plan.
Okay, good. All right. And is that a PWI item?
No, that's before PEX and they are working on it, but just want to remind everybody.
Okay, great. All right. So that's an opportunity to potentially overlap there with some resources. Okay. All right. Well, Mr. Williams and Director Lemke, I know Director Allen, I think we'll start talking about any studies that might need to be done this fall. So commissioners, if you have areas that weren't on this list of potential radar areas, speed zone, let's go ahead and send them over to Roads and Drainage, I think, right? That's Director Allen's handling that. So let's start compiling those lists and we'll work the process that way. All right, with that, seeing no further discussion, motions on the table. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. All right, chair votes aye, motion carries. All right, and then the last item here, or the next to last item, excuse me, is our item 1452, request for proposals for media services for use by Department of Fire Rescue. Consist of integrated marketing services, communications, and training. Recommend award to the sole responsive and responsible proposer, CAT Media Incorporated. Annual amount not to exceed $100,000. And does Chief Fulham want to speak on this, or Director Horner? Yes, go
I
ahead,
would
Director
just
Horner.
like to point out that this is a multi-year agreement, and the actual amount will be $300,000, and we will submit a substitute stating that it's $100,000 annually.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So we'll expect a substitute for that. And Chief Fulham, you want to speak about this quickly, please?
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner, and to all the commissioners. As you stated, this service will be used to create public education recruitment videos. We have used their service in the past. We actually have an active video on our website that demonstrates our physical agility tests. And so that those individuals who are coming for that test will know exactly what to do. So we're really excited, as we spoke about with our fire marshal's office, that we want to enhance our reach to our citizens as it relates to public education. And this will be our medium.
Excellent. And then don't forget, everyone loves Theo. So I'm sure Theo is part of this.
Yeah. Theo will be a star.
Okay, good. Commissioner Rader.
I'm just I see here marketing and branding, outreach support concerning recruitment. So, I mean, is the focus on recruiting, or what other areas of outreach, education, and retention are you talking about? And then you mentioned some sort of expectations for physical agility. I'm just trying to get a better idea.
Yes. So, Commissioner, as it relates to the public education, our public education unit that provides fire prevention education, all types of education, fall prevention, we realize that we need to move to more of a video medium. We currently do classes, but over these last 2 years, it really demonstrated that we're going to have to be able to reach our citizens in different ways. So this will allow us to do that. One area that I can tell you that we really are paying attention to is, obviously we have a very diverse community. And so we can create these videos in multiple languages that can be shared without actually having the educator in the room. So that's the way we would use them for our public education. As far as our recruitment, and what I was speaking of is a physical agility test. That's part of the assessment for new hires that they have to complete. It's a very detailed, somewhat complex process that they have to go through. And if they haven't done it before, if they haven't been given a chance to see this video, then they're coming there for the first time, having to climb ladders, drag hose, do these things without ever having seen it before. So that's the video I was speaking to.
Okay, so this is a general video production capability, and you will use it in several areas that may be internal training, recruiting, and that type of a thing, but you may also use it in public education. So the real focus here is the being able to develop training videos?
Yes, that's exactly right. Using their creativity and their production to create the videos.
All right. Well, it was just, and maybe Ms. Horner can speak to this. It was, I was surprised that you could only get one responsive and responsible, applicant on this, given that that's a fairly broad category, training videos.
We were surprised also. I think you can see by the market survey, we did have potentially 7 or 8 vendors who had expressed some interest by attending the mandatory meetings, but we had two LSPEs, I believe, who really wanted to subcontract, and we could not get a response as to why some of the vendors made the business decision not to present a proposal. We did have one that was from out of town, and they said they could not locate a photography partner here in the metro area.
All right.
Thank you for those questions, Commissioner Rader. Yeah, and I see one on here. One of the reasons from one of the companies didn't submit was they had trouble finding a photography partner. So, I mean, I think like obviously there's probably just dozens and dozens more companies or groups that do video things and marketing out there. I know that we recently were putting up we had a webinar about doing business with the county. I feel like there was something that y'all put out recently that was sort of, just trying to get people to come in and be on the list, right? So I think maybe that's one of our goals should be to just expand the pool of potential, vendors who could do, this type of work. Chief Fulham, the only thing I wanted to mention in terms of the video, so I think having doing the videos is really smart because that videos is the kind of the king of content, especially for social media. And then I'm aware that that particularly when like the refugees come in through Clarkston, that there's an orientation process. And I'm familiar they do some sort of fire orientation. So I don't know if that's an opportunity to do a video with subtitles for each language, or, maybe that's an opportunity, or maybe that's already being done or something similar to that. But just understanding, I know we got some issues in the Clarkston area with, new arrivals and just, getting them educated on fire safety. So I want to mention that, but no, I think this looks really good. Committee members, commissioners, any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, I think we're gonna get a substitute. So just I think the motion here would be to approve the item pending the substitute reflecting the $300,000 amount not to exceed.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Seeing no discussion, all in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. All right, last item is the one that we introduced this morning, and I want to be sensitive to the CEO's timeline because I know he made the announcement last week and he asked us all on the spot if we were going to approve it. In that airplane hangar, I think I saw thumbs up go up. So I don't want to hold things up, but I know we're going into PWI. So Zach, do we do you want us to go and approve this today, or?
I would like to have a do pass recommendation for the commission to vote on Tuesday.
Hey, did we ever get a actual item?
Yes, that was emailed during the discussion this morning. Recirculate it if you like.
Yeah, go ahead and recirculate it, and then
From
let's
whom?
just.
From
Mr.
whom?
Rader. From me. About 9:15-ish.
So I think maybe the only question I'll ask just broadly is, this is sort of in essence reserving $1 million for the program. But I guess y'all have some ideas about, like, is it going to go through police, community services? You know what I'm saying?
If you like, we can, if you give us 5 minutes,
okay,
we can go through the entire presentation. And it kind of lays out what we're thinking. Is that okay, Mr. Chair? Committee members?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
And so we're excited to be able to present this, recognizing that as the CEO announced on Tuesday or last Wednesday, the importance of providing opportunities for our youth, because quite often the largest determinant of being victims or committing violent crime is lack of employment and lack of productive use of their time. So this grant looks to work with our community partners to ensure that we are providing programming for young people that will assist in job developing jobs, recreation, skills building, academic assistance. It's going to be that broad. We're looking for them to come to us with ideas that we can fund these community programs. We recognize that the community organizations, community-based organizations, often has much more credibility and are accustomed to working much more locally than oftentimes government entities are. So Mr. Damon Scott, our Director of Human Services, will do a presentation in the next 4 minutes that will highlight how we anticipate rolling this out, identify some timelines and our next steps. Mr. Scott?
Thank you, Zach, and thank you, Mr. Chair and Board of Commissioners. And so along those lines, and the call to action and from the CEO Thurman for response for a grant program, it's important to note that the Human Services Department has a 16-year history of administering grants in this space and also has an Office of Youth Services. So we will utilize in our approach a collective response between our offices in the grants division and my administrative team and my youth services division to implement this initiative. Along those lines, we will use a modified version of our human services grants process, which will speed things up and those attached procedures. In this process, we will host a public virtual meeting to discuss the grant application process, and this mirrors what we do in the Human Services Grants program. The grant applicants will have about 2 weeks to complete the application and apply. We anticipate that between the pool of our existing nonprofit organizations and those that community development also have in tow, that identified organizations will be able to be fast-tracked in terms of being able to complete the application process. These applications will be reviewed and evaluated by subject matter experts, and then the top nonprofits will be recommended to you all, the BOC, for funding. We will notify the applicants and issue MOAs and host orientation meetings with the organizations, and the selected organizations will have 1 year to utilize the funding, very similar to the human services grants. And we will also track and monitor outcomes with spending and achievement reporting. For application and eligibility, there will be an electronic process that we currently use that utilizes SharePoint, and we have manuals and instructions for that so they can upload information. The eligibility criteria will be that each nonprofit that responds will be required to have 2 years of a proven track record of acceptable performance providing services in DeKalb County. They must be verified as a Georgia nonprofit and have that status and act in an active board of directors. They must also have a verified 501c3 status, and they must also have a current independent annual audit and a management report that's conducted by a licensed CPA. Next slide, please. The categories to address this grant initiative for youth safety and violence prevention will have categorical items such as youth intervention, crisis intervention, all ages, youth entrepreneurship and job training, a mental health component, parenting skills, and gang prevention. Our potential partners in this, of course, are public safety, which is our PD, our fire department, and the sheriff's office, the DeKalb County School District, DeKalb Community Service Board, juvenile courts, DeKalb Board of Health, our DFACs, our Community Development Department, Parks and Recreation, Workforce DeKalb, and our faith-based organizations. This is an aggressive timeline due to the sense of urgency. And in this, being that the agenda item was proposed this morning, we're anticipating a press release date on May 10th after BOC approval, a public meeting, which will be virtually getting information out to our network by May 12th, applications being due on May 26th, submitted back to the board for approval on June 14th, and then our MOAs will go into action on June 15th. Next slide, please.
Oh, okay. All right. That was 4 minutes. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So the big question, and like, I fully support this, and like, we'll help get the word out, and doing the meeting on May 12th. That sounds great. But that's quite a quick turnaround for some MOAs for an ARP project.
This isn't ARP, right? Is this ARP?
This is not ARP.
It's not ARP?
This is not ARP.
So that's my question, is this ineligible for ARP funding?
We can check. We did not It may well be. I can't answer that question, Mr. Rader.
Well, it does seem to me that, I mean, that's a lot of money out of the general fund reserve if we also could use these grant funds for it.
Let's. Right, so our proposal is for use of the general fund. I would suggest if there are funds available in ARP, it would probably be the second tranche, because I believe the funds are all allocated in the first tranche. For
Really?
one. I believe, let me double check because we're.
Yeah, I mean, we've been having a hard time. At the last time that we got those reports in the FAB committee, it seemed there was a sizable amount of money that was as yet unobligated.
Unspent.
Well, no, well, I mean, again, y'all don't apparently have to have any authorization from the commission. So, but when we were looking at that table, there was authorized, obligated, and actually spent, and it seemed as there was capacity. I would really appreciate y'all looking into that, because again, we're going to the fund balance if we have ARP funding that it could be used for. And so I'd vote to recommend approval, contingent upon certification and, demonstration that those funds aren't available and eligible under the ARP program. I mean, I want to get this done too, but it just seems
so maybe it's something, the most appropriate funding source with the preference being ARP. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to establish whether or not, the ARP funds are eligible and available.
Right.
And I did not see another version other than the one that you sent this morning. Did you send one before that?
No, that's what I'm saying. The one
Okay,
that
well, you said I'll send it again. I thought maybe you would. Okay. All right. I just think that might, I don't think that there's any resistance to trying to focus on violent crime prevention. But, it does seem like a missed opportunity, particularly since we've been trying to push some of that money out.
Right. So
All right, but as of now, it's not necessarily ARP, but it could be.
I mean, we should say that we should exhaust ARP funding opportunities prior to committing the general fund.
Right. I think, a motion to that effect, that the preference is ARP.
And
we'll
then
go back, evaluate.
On that issue of general fund, is this a general fund eligible item? I mean, this seems like it's more public safety district. Or do you see it as human?
I was using the term generically.
Well, it does say general fund in this resolution.
Right. So, and Mr. Sigler, as it relates to the reserve, would we call it? I think that's how we speak of the general reserves. But we would use the appropriate funding source. The first, I think your motion is look to ARP if it's available and eligible. And once that has been eliminated, then we would go to the general fund reserves, and then we'll see, because it would be eligible, I think, countywide, the not-for-profits, just like we're doing with ARP fund. But
okay, and the question is whether or not it's a human services expense, which is a general fund eligible, or if it is a public safety expense, which is more focused. I know that we'd spend some general fund on public safety, but our police fund is also a public safety fund.
Right. I think this is more of and we're managing it deliberately with through human services.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, all right, let's see if we can clear that part up. Commissioner Bradshaw or Patrick, do you have any questions or comments here? You like the idea of trying to use ARP funds if available?
Sure.
But also
eligible.
If ARP funds are available, yes. If not, then we proceed.
I fully support spending someone else's money first.
The federal government's money, yes, indeed.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, and then TJ, does that, we can just get a little more clarity on the fund or the reserve moniker, whether it's general fund or human services. Is that
right.
what? Okay.
Well, human services would be general fund, right?
Okay.
We can, add language, and if necessary, what the ultimate funding source is and why. especially since we're going to go back and look at ARP, if there's any remaining in the unallocated. That's our first place we're going to look, and then see if it's eligible.
Okay. All right. Commissioners, do you have a motion?
So I move that we recommend approval, but first, document with a preference to fund it out of ARP.
All right, I'll second that.
Okay. Motion a second. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right, chair votes aye, motion carries. Okay, that's the end of our agenda. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you.